So after putting in dozens upon dozens of hours into Anthem in the first few weeks at release in order to do my initial review, once that was complete, I pushed Anthem to the side and moved on to other games, as many did. In fact, a huge number of the player base did just that as well. But how is Anthem in 2020? Is it worth returning to, and what does the future hold for the game? Well, if you want the plain and simple answer, then no. Anthem is not worthy of investing your time in again if you have already experienced the majority of the content. If you're a new player, then you will get more out of the game, but you will also run into huge problems that exist with playing it these days. So only go into it if you can pick it up very cheap and are content with mainly playing through the story. If you have a team ready to go, then you will get more out of the game, but there is a point where the problems for everyone make themselves known. So let's return and see while you end up leaving again. What does the future hold for this game, and can it compete even slightly with the likes of Destiny 2, Warframe or The Division 2? So upon firing up Anthem these days, I was presented with a decent experience compared to that at release, as the load times have been improved, which is great, as how they were before was a disgrace, as they were way too long, there were too many of them, and players still would have smaller, quicker load times during some missions, which just broke up the gameplay experience. I do run my games from an SSD drive, but even when using the internal or my 5TB external, load times were faster and weren't as much of an issue that they once were. It was also good to have information regarding the world or enemies be able to be read during these load times, which is a very small thing, but makes things go that bit quicker. Unfortunately, the technical issues such as disconnections and crashings which existed at launch decided to rear their ugly head once again with my return to the game. Loading into Fort Tarsus only to be kicked back out to the intro screens to load back in again brought back memories of all the problems when the game came out, and it's disappointing to see it happen several times again. Being disconnected is one thing, but I also had an issue where I was stuck in the menu and couldn't get back out of it, and this lasted for around 20 seconds. Now, if you're wanting to know what I think of the graphics and performance, plus how the game plays, then be sure to check out my review. But now I wanted to focus on what's been changed, what has been added, what activities players are able to do, the population that the game has, and what can be looked forward to for those low number of players that are left. The number one problem I ran into by far, and which will affect all players, or the vast majority of players, from the most hardcore to the newest, is that of the extremely low player base, which can be a death sentence for this type of game. As more players leave, it then creates a worse experience for those who are still left, so then more players leave and the cycle continues. What this means now is that it was incredibly difficult being even able to play certain activities that I wanted to, such as certain strongholds. The only one which I could even play sometimes with other players was the Heart of Rage, and since I'd already run the stronghold so many times already, it wasn't giving me anything new. This problem was exacerbated further, as when it came to quick play, loading into an available mission which people are currently playing, I was also loading into the mission which the Heart of Rage stronghold is based upon. Playing others such as the Sunken Cell or Tyrant Mine, for example, became difficult as each time I selected them, the matchmaking would often take the maximum amount of time, and I'd hope that when it loaded, I'd actually have other players in it too, but there were a number of times where I was put into them solo. The footage you're seeing here is from multiple runs where I was loading in by myself, but also the few times I actually had a team. And this is where Anthem takes another hit, as playing within this world as a solo player is quite uneventful and you really feel like you're on your own. In Destiny 2, you'll always see other players going about their business and you'll play together during the public events, and this is just out in the open world. There is no matchmaking involved, and any activity that does have it, there are always other players ready for you to be matched with. The player base is so low in Anthem that a fair chunk of the content and how it's meant to be experienced is blocked off because of the low player numbers. To alleviate some of this problem, as I mentioned before, I just loaded up Quick Play so as to be guaranteed that I'd play an activity with at least one other player, and this isn't a solution, as now I found myself replaying missions with lower level players all the time. Helping those starting out in these types of games is great and really helps build a community around the game if its popularity is high, but Anthem's isn't. But now, yes, I could play with others, but I was running the same content repeatedly, and the other problem was the difficulty, and that problem was that there was none. A consequence of having long-time Anthem fans no longer playing, plus being matched with newer players, meant I could barely find any quick play activity in any of the Grandmaster difficulties, often having to play on hard, which has no real challenge at all, especially when playing with others. But then this led to another problem. Anthem is a looter shooter with some RPG mechanics, but playing on difficulties that are too easy, plus also playing through regular missions mostly made the loot I was getting not worthy of the time I was putting in, not to mention having to sit through the cutscenes if all players didn't choose to skip it. These sorts of games will always reward players with plenty of loot they don't want, and which won't increase the character's level at all. But now even earning better rewards wasn't possible, or extremely limited. Playing on lower difficulties meant the drop rate chances of better loot such as masterwork or legendary items was incredibly rare, and playing on higher difficulties such as Grandmaster 2 or even 1 was just too difficult when I'm loading into a stronghold on my own. So being unable to earn better gear due to needing to play on lower difficulties and the player base being so low to play on higher ones makes playing Anthem, well, kind of a waste of time if you're looking to progress your character and not simply enjoying the flight mechanics, the world and the gunplay. Legendary contracts can be run to improve your chances of getting legendary gear, but the chances are still quite minimal. But this goes for all games of this type and the love-hate relationship with RNG. We had the Cataclysm event last year, but that was only a timed event as an endgame activity, and this is an area where Anthem really falls down. A choice of 4 strongholds, daily and weekly contracts plus the legendary ones is absolutely anemic when it comes to what players can do once they hit max level and want to chase the best gear in the game. And that now brings me to the loot of Anthem. Even with greater drop chances on any difficulty in whichever activity, the weapons and items on offer are basically the same as to what the game has had the whole time, and what makes it even worse is that the weapons and items aren't all that interesting anyway. If we compare it to Destiny 2, that game has a large amount of reskins as well, and earning multiple versions of the same weapons with different roles. But the amount of times I'm receiving the same weapons in Anthem is just ridiculous. After each mission, I just end up scrapping everything, as I already have so many of the same items already, even if they do have slight changes between them. If it's so difficult to find other players in the activities I need to play in order to earn the loot, which I find is uninteresting, then what is going to make me stay playing Anthem at all? The answer at the moment is nothing. Once this video is out, I'll be moving Anthem to the side once again and moving on to other games. So what is the future of Anthem? With BioWare being almost silent and the roadmap of future content being cancelled last year, players have no idea what content is coming to the game in the future. There have been small updates as the world being covered in snow as it is now, and it looks fantastic, but Anthem's problems were never with its visuals. The game is in dire need of content, and I don't see it getting any anytime soon. With talk surrounding BioWare doing a massive overhaul of the game and relaunching it, we won't know exactly what that will be and what it will contain, so we would just need to wait and see. With so many gamers being burnt by the game at release, so many parts of the game would need some major work to rectify the disaster which Anthem has turned into. With people leaving the studio and the development problems surrounding the game being well known, this would have to be a No Man's Sky level of turnaround, and also commitment to it from BioWare and EA. But just as with No Man's Sky, no matter how good a version 2.0 may be, there will be many jaded gamers who will refuse to play it based on being burnt from the game's initial release. They would need to hope that it's good enough to bring in many new players. Any new overhaul of the game will need to do several things and do them much better, and the first is making the world feel much more alive than it currently does. Flying around is a great feeling, especially when the world is beautiful to look at, but it's so empty and often doesn't feel like a world that's real, as there is such a small amount of activities and events actually happening out in the world. To take some examples from Destiny, the world needs more public events with different difficulties, patrols and mini-bosses which spawn into the world at regular intervals, which gives slightly better rewards, but even with these, both Bungie and BioWare need to make these engaging enough and worthwhile of a player's time over dozens and hundreds of hours of playtime. Anthem most definitely needs more strongholds, more entertaining missions, more enemy variety, and better storytelling, but none of this is going to happen with the current state of Anthem. And just to reinforce the point as well, much of the standard enemies in the game, such as the Scar and the Dominion, are just so forgettable, and we fight our way through them constantly. But not only are they so bland, the AI could really use some work to make them more intelligent and engaging. The larger enemies in the game, such as the Titans, are quite good, but of course, the game needs more of them in the open world, different ways to take them down, and then have variances within each of these appearances, so they aren't always the same. The next area which also needs a complete overhaul is that of the weapons, in that there needs to be far more of them over different weapon types, and there needs to be some which are completely individual. With such a small pool of weapons already, having some which look almost identical just with a different coat of paint was one area which really showed players that nowhere near enough time was put into this game in both activities we would be doing and the loot we would be chasing. For a loot-based game, where players are at the mercy of RNG, the weapons and items need to be coveted enough by the player base for them to keep playing, and this isn't the case with Anthem. No gun that I have really stands out as something special, because there are too many similarities between too many of them, and being rewarded with the same guns repeatedly from these supposed endgame activities isn't enjoyable at all. With all these issues, I still enjoy the base gameplay of Anthem and flying around, but that's not enough for me to stick with it in 2020 without a huge overhaul to the point where it's basically relaunching the game. There have been some positive improvements, but these are more about quality of life adjustments and small tweaks to the sandbox instead of being anything that really changes the core of the game. Getting rid of the luck stat, which was unnecessary and just confusing, was a good move. Having the forge now as part of the menu, which allows players to swap weapons and items during missions, was very much needed and was a huge problem to not have that included upon release. And just further shows how many problems and issues there were with the game and its development. Completing missions now lets players choose another activity straight away, which is a godsend and cuts back on all the time we spent in loading screens before the update. And we can also dismantle unwanted items which we earned during the mission or activity we were playing. I wouldn't recommend returning for past players, as there simply isn't enough to do. The loot isn't really worth chasing, the player base is very low, and any real progression made isn't worth the effort, as the end game is almost non-existent to bother with grinding and improving your character for. I guess you could mess around with different builds and items, but again, there isn't really that one or two endgame activities where you can really get some challenge and take advantage of the build. For new players who are interested in knowing what the game is like, then there is a lot of fun to be had, but you'll be wanting much more variety, and by the time you hit the end game, you may be worn out. If you can find it cheap, then perhaps check it out and form your own opinion on whether or not Anthem is worth playing this year. I hope BioWare stick with it and turn it around and deliver the game we all hoped it would be, and set Anthem on the path to success instead of being one of gaming's biggest disappointments.